Good evening and welcome to the Monday, October 10th Muscatine School District Board of Education meeting. Madam Secretary, can you please take roll and help us determine the quorum, please?
Sure. Connard.
Here.
Cooney.
Here.
DeBeat.
Here.
LaRue.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Sure.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight we have the MHS Muskie volleyball team will lead us into the pledge. Please rise.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, MHS Muskie volleyball team. Thank you for leading us tonight. So moving forward, the next item is our student school board representative report. And with that, we have Caleb with us tonight.
Good evening. I received Gabe Salazar, my co-representative, could not be here tonight, and in addition to my report, he had some things that he wanted me to say on his behalf. First of all, homecoming week was successful. Student council raised around $1,500 from the Powder Puff this game year. The Powder Puff game this year, and the seniors took home the victory. The homecoming court was able to visit some of the elementary schools and interact with the little Muskies. The homecoming parade went well with a large turnout, and they're thankful for the support of businesses in our local community. They would like to thank the gift gallery downtown for donating tuxedos to the gentlemen on the homecoming court. The student council sold over 1,000 tickets to the homecoming dance, which if you didn't know is over $10,000. And lastly, congratulations to Gabe Salazar and Ella Schroeder for winning Homecoming King and Queen. On to my report, I sat down with Muscatine High School Principal Terry Hoganson to talk about the year thus far. He says the year's been off to a great start. The homecoming activities went well with no major bumps in the road, and Mr. Hoganson would like to thank the student body for that. Mr. Hoganson met with other MAC principals, principals of schools such as Bettendorf, Davenport, and schools relative to our size. For this meeting, MHS is having far less of the struggles and the issues that other schools are having, and Hoganson would again like to thank the student body for this. The new MHS Student Center is physically and functionally ready. We're just waiting on the ability to move staff and students into there. The Student Center will open in phases with the study area opening first, and the nursing area and the counseling and student services esque area on a later date. Waiting on presenting information to students and getting that all rolling. To reiterate, Student Center functions, even though we had presentation last month, it will include quiet study, conference rooms, and there will be available tutoring as well as counseling services and nursing services. It will open at 8 a.m. every day and is designed to support the classroom. And as a note, this area isn't going to be used for student overflow, such as other areas in the building. The MHS administration is working to continue to implement a system called SmartPass that we've been using to ensure safety and accessible attendance records. It's working at about 80% efficiency at the moment, where administration is working to stop abuse of SmartPass by some students and making sure that SmartPass is being used consistently. In addition, SmartPass will be the system around which the new Student Center primarily functions as students check in and out. Lastly, MHS is challenging their staff to, quote, create memorable moments. This means including fun and engaging learning opportunities that students will reflect positively on when they leave MHS. Recently, there was with the 11th grade U.S. history students, they had a collective bargaining simulation, and there have been other various activities designed to make sure that when students are older, when they're adults, when they have their own children, they can reflect positively on special memories they had while at Muscatine High School. That's all I have.
Thank you, Caleb. An
I do
amazing
have a question
report.
for you, if you could, please. You mentioned that it was over $10,000 from the homecoming. What are those funds used for?
I believe Gabe could probably knows more about this than I do, being the STUCO president. But I believe that these funds go towards funding student council and funding various events that student council will put on throughout the year for MHS students.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Karen, he's right, those go to student council, at least they have in the past. They've gone to student council, and from the student council, that's the things that they can support throughout the year, but it also provides the money that they would use for any trips that they do together or any kind of learning opportunities that they have as a council. One of the things that they've done in the last few years Caleb, do you know how many kids are on student council? Because that number had switched from about 25 to close to 100 kids. So they don't really exclude anyone. You just are tiered and you move up to the level of leadership that you'd like to seek. So there's a lot of kids that they try to support, whether it would be with breakfasts or with anything else, with the learning opportunities. So
There are several events that they put on. Recently, they had the annual senior march where, seniors walk downtown, they have lunch at the Merrill, and there's other various activities involved with that. So that is some of the funds that.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions, Caleb? Thank you, Caleb. Thank you. Amazing report. Thank you. Well, moving forward, with that, we move to citizen speak. And as we always say, if anyone in the audience wants to address the board, please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you will have 3 minutes to do so. Per our board policy, we cannot respond or engage in any discussion while we are in session. So anyone would like to approach the board?
We have Kelly Nazareth.
Hi, Kelly Nazareth, 127 Sherman Street. Excuse me for my nerves, but I have something to read that I think is pertinent. Luke 12:49 through 56. I have come to set the world on fire, and I wish it were already burning. I have a terrible baptism of suffering ahead of me, and am under a heavy burden until it is accomplished. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I have come to divide people against each other. From now on, families will be split apart, 3 in favor of me, 2 against, and 2 in favor, and 3 against. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Then Jesus, these are words in red, turned to the crowd and said, when you see clouds beginning to form in the west, you say, here comes a shower, and you are right. When the wind blows, you say, today will be a scorcher, and it is. And you fools, you know how to interpret the weather signs of the earth and sky, but you don't know how to interpret the present times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving forward with our agenda, the next item is the board targets, goals, reports. Item A, students will graduate prepared for post-secondary options. Item B, Muscatine School will utilize resources effectively and equitably. And item C, students will learn in a positive and supportive environment. With that, we move into the superintendent updates. And Clint, all yours, please.
Thank you, John. Just a few things to update on this month. And some of this is something I'll, kind of continue to come back and we'll hear more information on. Last time I reported out on attendance and kind of where we were this year relative to last year. As you know, we've put a little more focus on it, a little more conversation around that, updated some language on that. So at the last time we met, we were about 3% ahead of where we had been last year. That has moved up to 5%. So we're seeing that actually grow a little bit more, and that's good. I know in some conversations at Community Conversation, it was like, well, what about, prior to that, because last year was a tough year, and maybe you should be looking at some other years. And that's true, and we'll continue to do that. I just know I felt like last year we were going to have a better year, and we didn't. So just to continue to start to see the progress is a good thing. Those conversations are now well underway in terms of identifying the barriers some of our students are facing and how do we help support them and get them to school. So again, happy to report we're still moving in the right direction, and I know at each of our buildings they are putting in a lot of work in ensuring that our kids are more present at school this year than they have been previously. The other thing, I'm not going to get into details, but as you know, October 1st, or for us I believe it was October 3rd, is when we start with certified enrollment. And so they take a snapshot on that day. We won't finalize that till October 15th. And again, what happens is as we start uploading our students who's here on that day, open enrollments in and out, those numbers fluctuate a little bit as other districts, get theirs in, maybe not at the same time. So some of that starts to flatten out a little bit. But what I can say right now is things are looking positive. We're still going to be down students, but again, as we're trying to keep shrinking that number, it's looking pretty good there. One area of note that I want to mention are our elementary numbers are a little bit down, but our high school numbers are up significantly. So we're up 73 students from where we were last year. So we know that over time, one of the things in our enrollment projections was that the high school would get significantly smaller. And, so have to be up at the high school, I think, is a good thing. We're about where we expected to be with kindergarten. And one of the things we're going to have to continue to watch closely, as we shared with that, is the number of live births went down significantly. So that's going to impact the percentage of students that end up attending. But for right now, we're kind of in the ballpark. So October 24th is our next board session. We'll be reporting out more in detail on that enrollment, but just wanted to give you a first glance as we're looking at things. They're looking better. So, and then the last thing I just wanted to mention, our Desired Daily Experience survey is going to be out again October 24th. Tony said we'll be releasing that again. As you recall, we did that last April. We had about 1,300 responses, but that's a number we'd like to see higher. Obviously, between all of our students, our staff, and our parents, we want that number to go up. And again, from that information last April, we looked at all of those results. We also looked at all of the individual comments, and there is a lot of work that's happening this year in response to some of that feedback and some of those comments. So I just want to encourage from our students, staff, and parents standpoint, we really want people to take that survey and provide that feedback. And with that, any questions?
Clint, are we doing anything different than we did in April as far as trying to reach out to people? Have we tried to figure out if there were groups that we just were underrepresented? I mean, I don't. And
Well,
if so, what are we doing
This will
differently?
be a little bit different. One of the things we are going to do is have people identify the building, especially for staff, now obviously, and students. It can get a little tricky with parents because they represent multiple buildings. But it can be good if you have that information, because I know our buildings are asking for it. We know what the district results are. We kind of want to see what our building results are, and then they can tailor some of those pieces more specifically to them. That's not one of the kind of filters we had in there last year, so we will add that. Again, I think, I'll let Tony speak to any of the different ways, but part of it too that I think is really important is that we have to demonstrate that we're looking at this information and we're using it. Because for a lot of people, if the experience has been, hey, I'm gonna put some stuff here and nothing's ever gonna happen, they just quit responding, right? So if we want to see those numbers go up, we have to be very clear. We shared that information. We're very transparent in putting that information out. But we also have to be really clear about how we've used it and how we'll continue to use it to ultimately just improve. So.
I know one of the requests last year on that, and I don't know how easy it is. They asked, some grandparents wanted to be a part of that conversation too, and how those contacts were made, as we have a lot of grandparents participating in our students' lives, so.
And I think if anybody was in the our student information system as a contact, it got
Emergency
sent out.
contact.
Yep. So it wasn't just to direct parent guardian.
And this is premature, but since we are looking at the alternative high school, then that hopefully the intent, once we get that started, that may make a difference on our numbers, because then those folks, students that go to that will be included in our numbers.
Well, they're included now.
They're included now?
Because they're already at the high school,
Because they're
right?
technically at the high school.
Yeah.
It's
So
not
it
that we're
won't-
picking up kids that
We
dropped
won't
out.
necessarily, well, there could be kids that come back, but really, when we think about that alternative high school, it's just taking, so if our number is 1550, it might be 75 kids out of that 1550, right? So the high school, that number may shrink a little bit more, but we have this other attendance center.
Gotcha.
So.
When families put their preferred language, does our system communicate with them in that language?
Yes, so in fact, I think at times with with this new system, it will send out whatever's reported in there. We've had families contact us and say, well, we don't speak that language in our household. Well, you marked it on the form. Oh, well, then we'll go back and change it.
So you know it's working.
It is working.
Good.
Parent Square is a lot more efficient with languages.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yes, Parent Square is much more efficient with languages. I'm just repeating what Tony said while he wasn't at the microphone.
Yeah.
Any other question, Clint? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Clint. Okay. Moving forward, we move into possible action item. The following items are considered to be routine by the Board of Education and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a director so requests, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered in its normal sequence from the agenda. The items are minutes, bills and claims, employment recommendations, special education contracts, board policy, third reading, and the last item is policies, no minimal required by law changes. What are the wishes of the board?
I'll make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, motion carried. We move to now item H. And item H is not an action item, by the way, even though it does say an action. But basically, the item deals with the consideration of financing proposals opened and reviewed by the Superintendent of Schools, Secretary of the Board of Directors, and the placement agent. And I will turn this to Clint, please.
And I'm then very going to quickly pivot to Matt Gillespie is here from Piper Jaffray. He, again, was that placement agent, so he's going to go through and just go through what the proposals were, the background information. So basically, everything he's going to talk about is going to lead to your next item H and that decision. So, Matt?
Yep, that's correct. So, good evening. As Clint said, my name is Matt Gillespie from Piper Sandler in Des Moines.
Sorry.
Before I go into item H, which is really just me discussing what happened, and then we'll get to the action item, which is item I, I wanted to commend Caleb. I go to probably 75 to 100 school board meetings a year, if you can imagine that. And at many schools, there is a student representative, but I have never seen a student representative actually speak or much less give an actual presentation. So you did a really good job. Your speaking skills were very good in front of the board and the community as well, so good job with that. So I'm going to go over the packet that's in front of you. I think that Daphne copied that. At the top of the very first page, it says Summary of Proposals Received. So we're going to go through this packet in some detail. You can definitely stop me at any time and say you have questions or you don't understand something. I will try to stop every so often to give you that opportunity. On the first page, we are just listing the summary of the proposals that were received. So below the blue purple-ish line that's kind of in the middle, you see the various proposals that were received, and there were quite a few. For sales tax bonds here in Iowa, we typically see maybe 3 to 4, and although it looks like there's not as many banks as it looks like there is, because some of the banks gave us multiple proposals, but still this is quite a few proposals to receive, so that's a good thing. Even though some of them were at very high interest rates that you would not have considered, still good to see that there were institutions interested. We're going to concentrate basically on the first 3 at the bottom part. So that's JP Morgan A, JP Morgan C, and Truist Bank, which is the highlighted one. If you look under the interest rate, just if that's the only thing you were looking at, you would say, well, why would we not award this to JP Morgan? They have a 3.8% interest rate. That is better than all of the other interest rates, which is true. However, if you go over 2 columns underneath the call date, you see that that particular proposal was going to make the bonds not callable, which means that you could never have paid any of the principal off early. Now, you may never pay the principal off early. You may just not have an opportunity to do that. You may not have extra cash to do it. You may not have the desire to do it. But the flexibility to be able to do it is very, very valuable to you. Not only to save money if you were to possibly refinance the debt, which you will be able possibly to do, at least legally you can do that, if interest rates drop back lower sometime over the next 5 or 6 years. It is possible, although I doubt that your board is going to get into this because you don't borrow a lot, and that's a good thing overall. But if you got to the position where you needed to borrow a very large amount for some reason that you might not even know of today, being able to restructure the bonds that you're issuing or approving today will be extremely important to you to have that flexibility. So the non-callable is really just, we don't believe that it's a legitimate option for you. But then you might look to the second bid and you say, well, this is also JP Morgan, 3.86, that's better than 3.89, which is true, except their proposal in that C, bid C, wouldn't allow you to pay off the bonds or begin to pay the bonds off basically for about 5.5 years. Well, by then, you're so close to the final maturity that there is very little interest left to pay anyway, so it's not that valuable to you either. And the difference between that bid and the next bid, if you look under the interest cost column, so that's the $2.71 million, the $2.73 million number, the difference there is only $21,000. And while you might think $21,000 is a lot of money, which it is to me and probably to many of you, in the bigger scheme of things with a $15 million debt issuance, $21,000 is really nothing. And it's not valuable enough to give up that flexibility, as I said before. So therefore, we fall then to the third bid, which is Truist Bank, 3.89%, and they allow you to pay the bonds off at any time on the payment date. So that means 2 times each year. But you could begin to do that as early as this December or next June and then any of the 6-month periods after that. You would just have to be able to pay the bonds off in whole. So if you were going to refinance them or restructure them, you would be paying them off in whole anyway, because you'd be replacing the bonds with a completely new issuance of debt that would be rolled into maybe another construction project or something like that. If you simply wanted to just pay off $5,000 of the principal or something, you couldn't do that because you have to do it in whole. But again, your district has enough needs. I know that this isn't funding every need you have. So if you really have extra cash 2 years from now, 5 years from now, I believe it's probably less likely that you would choose to pay the debt off sooner. You would go out and fix the roof of some building that needs it, or you would buy more school buses, or whatever it is that you have these other needs for. So for that reason, we are recommending that you award to Truist Bank with that 3.89%. And that's what the rest of this packet is assuming. Now, that does not mean you have to take that action, but we'll go through the rest of the packet, and then we can come back with questions as well. The second page, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on unless you want to ask questions, which you certainly can do. But this is showing us a history of your certified enrollment. So you see that in the top left box. And certified enrollment, for those of you that don't know, there's about 1 billion different enrollment counts that you count in Iowa. But the certified enrollment is the number of students whose house is physically within the school district. So some of the kids don't even go to school here because they open enroll out. And you have other students that open enroll into your district. Their house is in a different district. You are not getting the sales tax from those students, but you do get the sales tax revenue from the students who live in the district, even if they open enroll out. So that's what that count is showing us. In the box right below that, it's just showing a history of per student revenues, as well as then total revenues that have been paid to this district. And then the big table right in the middle of the page is again showing you that history, but then also showing you a guess, and it is somewhat of a wild guess. There is some thought behind it, but certainly none of us can know what your enrollment is going to be like 5 years from now, let alone 10 or 15 or 20 years from now. And then we see the per student estimate as well, statewide. Keep in mind that amount, whatever the amount is in any given year, is now the same amount for every student at every district, no matter where they live or go to school. It was not that way before 2008, when districts and counties actually were voting the sales tax independently. So there were rich retail counties and poor retail counties, and that was having a big difference with districts in your area, actually. Loiza Muscatine, for example, there's not a lot of retail activity in that district, or wasn't, so they were not getting enough money literally to even buy one school bus each year. Whereas districts up in, for example, Okoboji, not a lot of people living there necessarily, but a lot of sales tax generated because lots of people from Iowa and the Midwest go there and enjoy summer vacations, and those schools were getting enormous amounts of revenue, as well as like the metro districts. So it just was not fair before, but now it is fair. Every school is getting the same revenue per student. If you go to the page after that, which is page 3 at the bottom, here you see the debt limit calculation. So you're nowhere near the limitations of your ability to issue debt, but I still think it's important for the school board to know that there is a limit, and probably more importantly, of course, for your community to know that there's a limit. Because you are borrowing for your district quite large amounts, at least historically speaking. So there's probably some folks in your community that think you've lost your mind and don't know what's going on and think you're pushing yourself over the edge. Well, this little table here is to show you that that's not true. That's not happening. So in Iowa, every municipality, so it's not just school districts, but cities and counties, community colleges, any municipality that has the authority to issue debt is limited to no more than 5% of their assessed property value in any given year. So your current assessed property value, and you see there at the top, that's the January of 2021. We're in 2022 now, even nearing the end of it, but 2021 is the most recent value we know. We're always a year behind with property values. So the most recent assessed value for your district is $2.27 billion. 5% of that number is $113.8 million. So what this means is that your school board cannot issue more than $13.8 million in principal now, between now and next June 30th, the number will recalculate next June 30th, usually getting higher because your property value usually goes up, but it does not always. And of course, next year, you will continue to make new bond payments as well, so you'll pay off some of the principal that you're issuing now. When we deduct off today's $15 million and the presumed $10 million that will probably happen as well about a month from now, and the reason that those are split out, I don't know how much it's been explained to you all, but there is an advantage, at least theoretically, to issuing $10 million or less in a calendar year. You should get lower interest rates if you can do that, but your need was roughly $25 million. So it was determined to issue $15 million this calendar year, 2022, so that today's debt is what's called not bank qualified. So you are probably paying slightly higher interest rates than you would if you issued 10 million or less, but you don't have a lot of choice because you need to issue more. So we're going to issue the 10 million. That's all going to happen in the next month and a half, but it will not close until January 3rd. So it will close after the first of the year and it will be in the new calendar year. So that $10 million issuance that's yet to come, that one will be bank qualified. So if everything were to remain consistent between now and a month from now, and the interest rate bids are taken for that issuance, you would get lower interest rates. Now, we don't know in reality because over the next month, the world is changing, right? It's changing every day. Interest rates may be going up, they may be coming down, and they have been going up and they have been coming down over the last 6 months. It's just that they've been going up more than they've been coming down. So they're quite a bit higher than they were a year ago, but still very low. When you look historically, that's something important, I think, for the board to know. You certainly are not issuing today's debt at as low of interest rates as you would have last October. But last October, and really the last 5 years, 3 or 4 or 5 years before that, was not a normal world that we were living in. So it is not the case that we should all be going out and buying new vehicles and paying 0% interest. Or in the case of general obligation bonds, for example, we had schools last October issuing 20-year, you're issuing just today short of 10 years, but 20-year maturities, general obligation bonds at 1.87% interest average. Just not great for the schools, obviously, but not a normal world to be living in. So as we've seen and heard over the last few months of interest rates rising, we maybe all are getting somewhat frustrated with that on a personal level, but we all need to remember that the sky's not falling. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. We are just now at the low point of normal. Low point. Rates can still go up more, and we're still in the normal range, or historically normal. So just keep that in mind. If you go to the next page, this is the page that page 4 at the bottom. It just says estimated across the top. This is just the sources and uses, not just from today, but of the entire plan. So you can see in the big box on the left, the five general or large issues that you're going to be funding. Those are just estimates of cost. You haven't taken formal bids for all of those, so you don't know for sure what those are going to cost. But we hope that your architect is reasonably accurate. And then you see in the bottom box, the sources of funds. There's where you see today's $15 million, next month's $10 million, and then maybe another issuance of sales tax bonds in 2024. However, if those costs come in exactly accurate, which certainly they're not going to, but if they're reasonably close to that, you also see at the bottom of that top big box, it says surplus deficit, and there would actually be generated about $2.5 million more than you need. So what that means is that if the costs of the projects you're contemplating truly come in pretty close to what this shows, you probably will not need, or you will not be issuing more sales tax bonds in 2024. That $2.3 million issuance just won't happen. There's no need for it. Even if you did have a need, it's also possible that the board at that time could choose to pay cash. You have quite a bit of cash, but you also have other projects too. So we'll talk about that more as the projects unfold more over the next 24 plus months. But clearly you can easily fund the needs that you have, at least for these 5 projects. And then on the right side of the page, it's just trying to show you what each different issuance might produce. The page after that, at the bottom of that page, it says page number 5. In the top right-hand corner, it says page number 1. These are just documents coming from various different packets of information. this shows the sources and uses just from today alone. So you're issuing $15 million of new principal. You would not be issuing more than $15 million. So there's that $10 million limit that I discussed, which is the bank qualified limit. But there's a whole different limit of $15 million that if you can issue $15 million or less, again, in a calendar year, then it's called a small issuance. And I know that it doesn't sound like it's very small, but when you, again, look at the bigger scheme of things and you look at maybe the state of California or the state of Iowa or the city of Des Moines, they might be issuing hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. So the $15 million is still a reasonably small amount. And if you can issue $15 million or less, you get to take what's called a small issuer exemption, and that means you have 3 years to spend the proceeds. If you were to issue $15 million and $1 or more, then you only have 2 years to spend the proceeds. Now, it's not a huge deal. It's not a huge penalty if you can't meet it. But in your case, there's no reason not to, because it seems that your cash flow, et cetera, doesn't require you to issue that any more than $15 million right now. So that will just give you the sort of luxury to spread the expenditures, if needed, out over 3 years. If you go to the next page, here you just see the amortization schedule or the repayment schedule. So assuming that the board approves and awards this tonight, this is exactly what their payments will look like for today's bond. So you see the interest rate there, the 3.89 in the middle of the page. There are annual principal payments. That is typical for most municipal bonds, whether it's the city or the county or the school district. Semi-annual interest payments. Otherwise, it's just a loan. Just like what you or I have for your house, your car, your student loan, it's the same concept. It's called a bond because that's just what Iowa law calls it, but it's really a loan. And it works the same way any debt that you might have would work. And then in the far right column, you see from today alone, those payments are basically right at about $2.48 million annually. They will be paid off by June 30th because your revenue purpose statement has not been voted and renewed, which you will need to do eventually. And I know that, Tom, that you've had that on your some of the documents that he's prepared for you. If you have questions about that, we can talk about it, but just know that you're going to need to have that election sometime, but you don't need it imminently, and you don't need it to issue these the bonds today or the next series of debt either. Page 7 is just kind of combining those two pages. So again, page 7, which in the top right-hand corner, there's a little skinny box that says sales tax revenue bonds. Here you see on the left side of the big table, that's just the amortization schedule, so it's matching what was on the prior page. The two little boxes at the bottom, the sources and uses, again, matching what was on 2 pages prior. But what's extra on this page is the right side of the big rectangle, and that's where we see the total payment from today, again, roughly $2.48 million in the third from the right column. The total revenue that you're generating from sales tax is approximately $5.6 million. It's going to change every year depending on the number of students that you have, certified students, and the statewide sales tax per student. Generally, it's going to go up and has gone up even when your enrollment has gone down, because the per student number statewide has been growing faster than your enrollment has been declining, for example. But most importantly is the far right number, excuse me, where you see the number is basically 2.2. That's showing us what we would call the debt service coverage. It's like a debt to net ratio figure for those of you that go to the bank and borrow money. The bank wants to make sure that your incoming revenue from your job or wherever you generate money is sufficient to pay the debt back. That's what that number is showing us. And it's showing us that as of today, with the facts we know, you have about $2.26 in dollars coming in every year from the sales tax for every $1 that you owe to make a principal and interest payment. So we'd say you have 2.26 times coverage. That is very high. That's probably one of the reasons why you got quite a few bids today, because the banks know there's really almost no chance that you would not pay this debt back. You have an enormous amount of extra cash that you will use, though, to buy buses, technology, maintenance, other projects as well. But the bonds do have first lien, and the banks, the lenders know that. So they're going to get paid first if there were ever to be any kind of problem, which, again, doesn't seem like there would be in your case because you're not going to be borrowing to the maximum limits. But if there ever was an issue, the bonds would be paid first. In that little red box in the bottom, right? That's just showing you what it looked like several months ago when we started this discussion. At that time, we estimated that the interest rate might be around 3.05, which is truly where it would have been. But of course, we're all aware that interest rates have risen quite a bit, and there's nothing you can do about that. If you could have issued this debt, like I said earlier, last October or last November, for this debt, you probably would have gotten somewhere around 2.1 to 2.2%. But you can't look back and wish you had done it because that's history and you weren't ready to do it, you didn't need to do it, so there's nothing you can do about that. 3.89 is still, like I said earlier, historically a really low interest rate. But the interest might have been closer to 2.1 million versus 2.7 million. And then the cost of issuance, although this is not a big difference, is about $20,000 less than what we had projected, just because we typically kind of project those things high to make sure we can come in under your expectations. Then the next 2 pages, I know you have seen this before, but it's not something that you see every meeting that you have. It's something I think Tom presents to you maybe once a year or so. But this is a combined Pebble and sales tax cash flow. It's very, very simple. It is like a checkbook register. It's just got a lot bigger numbers than I assume most of your checkbooks have in it. But it's the same concept. It's showing money coming in, money going out, and then what's left over. Your checkbook register at home is going backwards in time. It's showing you how much money you have today, and where did you spend that money over the last week, months, years. This is the opposite. It's showing you how much money do you have today, or at least as of June 1st, and what might happen in the future. So you had $11 million in cash in June. This is just sales tax and Pebble, so we're not talking about general fund at all. Although, again, you can ask questions about that. That's a completely separate topic, though. So you had $11.8 million. We're adding future sales tax. That's the third from the left column that has those blue or purple numbers. Then we're adding the assumption of voted Pebble and board Pebble, making assumptions about property valuation increases so that your Pebble revenues generally grow over time. If you look at the voted Pebble column, this is the fourth column in that big table, and at the very top of it, the first number is 986,960. If you follow that column down to the second page, you'll see that towards the bottom of that column, there is a dark line under the number 1,133,707. That dark line is signifying when your voted Pebble will end. Now, you may renew it between now and 2030, but I don't know that you're going to do that, and you don't know that that's going to happen or that the community will support it. So I do not make that assumption. Now, it's not a big deal in this table because this table only goes out to 2030. But in new files, we've, of course, been updating this file for the district for many, many years over time just to help you understand that you could, in fact, pay cash for many things you've done in the past. The new files that I create go out to 2051. So either after your next bond issue, which is probably when I'll do it, I'll transition that to a newer file. And then it will become more important because you'll see that voted Pebble drop off, and you'll see your expenditures continue on, and it'll start showing, do you have a problem? Don't you have a problem? Should you spend less on buses or technology, or can you keep spending? Whatever the case may be, it will be helpful for that. But you do see under that light yellow, going back to the first page of that cash flow, you see the bond payments being made. So under the 2022 column, those are the actual payments that you're, we hope, we assume, approving here in a few minutes. Then there are payments for the 2023 bonds that begin with $107,000, and then the 2024 bonds, which might not ever actually happen, but if they do, that's where the $336,000 is. So this worksheet already assumes that all of those bonds have been issued and that you're just repaying them. And then you're expending money on routine needs, which is the vehicles, buses, lawnmowers, whatever it is, cars, vans, technology, one-to-one computers, new carpeting, new tuck pointing, putting in new windows, whatever you're spending money, just the routine things that have to be done at the district. We want to make sure that the board is not overcommitting money to repay bonds that you need to do those routine things, and you clearly are not in this case, because you can afford to do all of those things, and you see in the various colored boxes, those are just the other projects that are, some of them are already underway, some of them are going to be underway soon. Those are things that you have agreed to fund, but they're separate from today's bond. Those are things you're just paying for in cash. And those, again, it shows that you can do that and still maintain very healthy cash balances. If you go to the second page of that and you see out in 2030, the bottom right-hand corner, if you think of it as a checkbook register, this would suggest that you could issue all 3 series of bonds, of which you're really only doing 1 tonight. You could keep buying buses and technology, all that stuff. You can fund those needs, those colored projects that were in there, and you still might have close to $20 million over just the next 8 years that you could spend on other things. So there's a very large ability for you to fund other needs without needing to borrow money. And of course, if your needs are even larger, which I'm sure you have at least hopes and dreams of larger things, maybe not needs, those might require bonding. But again, we can talk about all that at a later point. And then the very last page is just showing you the timeline. This is the timeline for both today and the next series as well. So you see we are at October 10th. The only thing you're doing from an action standpoint tonight, if you do it here in a minute, is award to the best bid. That's it. At your next meeting on October 24th, there will be other action items where you will have to approve those legal documents that are sent to you from your attorney, which is Allers and Cooney in Des Moines. And then the transaction will close on November 8th. So the $15 million will come into whatever financial institution you decide to put that money into. And Tom and I and Daphne had a conversation about that this afternoon. So you will probably be going out to area banks, asking them for bids perhaps. Many of the banks will not want this money. It's a very large amount of money for a smaller bank, although you do have large banks in Muscatine. But for a smaller bank cannot take on $15 million. It's just too much. In particular because it is public funds. That's very different than if I had 15 million, which I don't, but if I did, and I was going to just put it at the bank doesn't really care as much, and they would take my 15 million, because if the bank goes bankrupt, no big deal. I can lose my money, they don't care. The school, the city, the county, you cannot lose that money. So the bank has to participate in what's called a revolving program with the state treasurer, so they have to match your deposits. This is true of your general fund, your Pebble money, any of the money that's in any bank in Iowa. They have to match your deposits with Treasury securities. That's a big hassle for them, and at least up until recently, kind of a money-losing thing for them because they weren't earning any money on those treasuries, but yet they had to own them to offset your public funds that were there, so that if the bank were to go bankrupt, the community, the municipalities would not be harmed. And we know that program works, by the way, because it has happened before. It happened about 25 years ago with a bank in Hartford just outside of Carlisle. So I was involved with that at a different place I worked, and we know that system works. So it's a very good system. And then about a month from now, November 14th, we'll go through this exact thing all over again with the 10 million, which would then close, as I said earlier, on January 3rd. So, any questions about what you see on any of those pages, the bids themselves, the process, sales tax in general? Okay, if not, then I am going to lead you through item I. It is acceptable for me to paraphrase the resolution, which I am going to do, and we just need one board member to so move what I say and another board member to second that motion. And then Daphne, you are required to have a roll call vote. So the resolution before you is directing the sale of $15 million of school infrastructure sales services and use tax revenue bonds, Series 2022, to Truist Bank of Charlotte, North Carolina.
So moved.
Second.
Director Connard,
Approved.
Director Cooney,
Affirm.
Director DeBeat,
Aye.
Director LaRue,
Aye.
Director Morgan,
Aye.
Director Phillips,
Aye.
and Director Shore.
Aye.
Okay, that is all you had to do tonight. If you sit up tonight and just look through that in more detail, which I'm sure you're going to do, come up with lots of other questions, that is great. Pass those questions on to Tom. He probably will know them because he's had a lot of history with this as well. I've worked with Tom for pretty much my whole career, and I think his too, about 23 years. If community members ask you questions and you don't know the answer to them, you wouldn't be expected to know all those answers. Pass those along to Tom. He can find me just about anywhere I am in the state, anytime, and we want to make sure that your questions or the community's questions are answered. And then we'll be sending you some more information and discussing this all again in about a month. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, moving forward, we move into item J on our agenda. Approve administration authority to seek additional modified supplemental amounts from the School Budget Review Committee for the 21-22 negative special education balance in the amount of $729,755. And I see Tom is standing there to explain and take any question that any of us might have.
Yep, so what we're talking about here tonight is asking for that additional spending authority for our special education expenditures. As you know, in the general fund, we operate on the concept of spending authority. And there are two areas where if a board does overspend their authority, they can ask after the fact for that additional authority. And special education is one of those. And so tonight, we're asking to approve the authority to seek the modified supplemental amount. On page 2 of that document is just the current year and then a history, a 2-year history of our special education expenditure, revenues and expenditures. And I'll just point out that line 15, and I'm just putting on here selected lines from our special education report that we sent to the Department of Ed. Transportation expenses, you can see that that went up significantly. And in talking with Ryan, there are 2 reasons for that. Obviously, we put more miles on our buses for special education routes because we did add a special education route this last year. Our revenues were down, and our expenditures were actually down somewhat too. So I don't have any significant red flags with that dollar amount. As you all learn from IASB, is you don't want to give up spending authority. We're not necessarily going to fund this, but with cash reserves, but we don't want to pass up any spending authority. So, any questions?
And Tom, just for clarification, I assume this is what I call a normal
Yes,
practices for
this is a
school
normal
districts.
practice for a district that has a negative special education balance for the year. Obviously, if it was positive, we wouldn't be coming here tonight, but yes, it is normal. And as you can see, the last 3 years, we have asked for the additional authority.
Thank you. Any question for Tom?
One route was almost $300,000?
Well, the dollar amount really didn't equate to one route costing $300,000. It was the mileage that got put on all of our special education routes. I mean, our transportation costs went up for other reasons too, such as fuel costs and repairs and maintenance and such. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion, please?
Motion to approve the administrative authority to seek additional modified supplemental amounts for the School Budget Review Committee.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any more discussion? Okay, if there's no more discussion, those of you who are in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, motion carried. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, we move to item K, which is to approve the 2022 IASB legislative priorities. And we do have some information that we have in front of us. Any anything that you would
Yeah,
like
this is
to add,
something
Clint,
we
to
do
that?
each year. You know, again, we kind of go through this each year and identify what our priorities are. They do have some highlighted ones at the end. Those are the ones that I would recommend. That's what's in the recommended approval. And that relates to mental health, which we've talked about in the past as priorities. Teacher recruitment and licensure, given what we're trying to accomplish across the state, but certainly here in terms of ensuring we have the best possible staff and we can pay them and recruit them in. And then funding is incredibly important. Dropout at risk is included this year. And I think, again, very unique for us too. I think it is an important issue, but there's some funding mechanisms in there too. As we start looking at potentially an alternative high school, those additional funds would be very useful in order to sustain that program. So given what we've talked about in the past, what are those recommendations, including the dropout at risk, is what's being recommended tonight.
Any question for Clint or for any of us?
So some of the teacher recruitment and licensure, they have, those are some just ideas or plans to have alternative licensure, is that correct?
From the state level,
From the
yes.
state level, yeah.
Yep. They're talking about loan forgiveness programs. What are some other ways that we can get more candidates into the state and kind of increase the pool of candidates that we have to choose from? It is, and the reciprocity piece is important because if you are in Iowa going to another state, it's super easy to get your license and go there. But if you're from another state trying to get in,
Right.
it's much more difficult. So we do have, you know, there are candidates who are like, it's not worth it, I'm going somewhere else, right? So again, we want to make sure that it, we're competitive, right, to other states as well.
Clint, just to reiterate that or to piggyback off that, I ran into, when I was a principal, ran into a situation where we had somebody come from Wisconsin with a master's degree. They had to take 15 hours in Iowa just to not use their master's. And there was what they were licensed in Wisconsin, but it didn't transfer over to Iowa. We required them to take 15 more or 5 more classes is what it was. So they were on probation for 3 years. It's tough.
And that's an additional cost to the
Yeah,
teacher
to them.
in order to get that.
Without going into a big detail on them, but I see where it says expansion of programs for Teach Iowa Scholar troops to teachers, and then also a teacher intern program. I guess I don't know enough about the Teach Iowa Scholar, especially one, and the troops to teachers.
That I can try to get more information on, but there
Yeah.
are some programs from the state that, you know, look to recruit. The teacher intern program, I think that relates to some of the work we have been doing through that grant. And it's opportunities like that, right? But that has to come with funding. And so that's why it's built in here.
Voting these activities in aren't necessarily increasing costs to the school district. It's opportunities to assist later on in borrowing activities and further funding programs, correct?
Say that again.
Voting these in, you wanted us to vote these in,
Yep.
correct? But voting these in aren't necessarily increasing the cost of the district. These are new opportunities.
All
for
this means is
programs.
we're going to share this with IASB,
Right.
and they're going to take that from all these different districts and kind of compile them into, here's what the platform for the Iowa Association of School Boards will be for this year.
Thank you.
So again, we kind of have this conversation every year.
Yep.
And then again, I think they finalize that at the November conference.
Yep.
And that's a good point, Clint, because at some point, even if we are sending those items to them, some of those items might not end up part of that final platform because they take the whole Iowa, the school districts, and then combine them and vote on that as a final one. Yeah.
I'd make a motion to approve as presented the ISAB legislative priorities for 2022.
Second?
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, we had some discussion, but any more discussions before we call for a vote? Okay, all those in favor of approving the 2022 IASB legislative priorities, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, motion carried. So moving forward, we move into next item, to approve the contract for construction to Swanson Construction for the central production kitchen in the amount of $5,775,000. And I see Ryan is ready to give us some updates here.
No updates really. So the closing of the land purchase is in the hands of the lawyers, getting ready to finalize and wrap that up. As soon as that is finalized, these guys are ready to go. Swanson is ready to mobilize as soon as we close on the land deal. In the letter of recommendation, you'll see that there was 2 alternates, just to kind of throw you out. So the first alternate was a generator system, backup generator system. We're not recommending that. That was to about $200,000 extra, and in the grand scheme of things isn't worth that. And then the alternate number 2 is a deduct from that. So we're getting rid of some canopies that were added. We're more of a nice to look at type of thing, not necessary for the structure of the building. So that's a deduct for about $190,000. Any questions?
In the school system, do we have any backup generators?
No. We have some battery backups on lights, things like that. Nothing that would, basically what this was is to run the freezers if we lost power.
Right.
If we don't open them and we have a couple days of leeway, and if we don't have power back for a couple days, we have some bigger issues that are happening rather than just the generator.
Any more questions for Ryan?
Does the no completion date worry you?
No. But honestly, these guys, and the reason that we didn't have the completion date was the steel lead time. We have that back now, so we're in pretty good shape.
Ryan, when do you expect to start working on that project?
So if we can close next week, which I think we can, we would be working like 2 days after that, as soon as they can mobilize.
So within a couple weeks to a month?
Yes, it is our complete intention to get all of the foundation and cement work done before the snow flies, so then we can start erecting steel over the winter. Okay. So as soon as that foundation's in, we can start building.
Still need to harvest that ground over.
Yeah, they still need to harvest, and it's getting really close. I was there today. I drove by. It's real close. I would say within the next 2 weeks they're going to be harvesting that anyways. So,
thank you. Okay, what are the wishes of the board?
I make a motion to approve the contract for construction to Swanson Construction for the central production kitchen in the amount of $5,775,000.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the contract for construction to Swanson Construction for the central production kitchen in the amount of $5,775,000, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, motion carried. Thank you. So moving to our discussion and information piece of our agenda, and the first item is August financials. And
Sure.
Tom, it's all
Yep.
yours.
Okay, so tonight I'm presenting the August and July treasurer's report. We're reconciled, and there's a comparison to the prior month. Our fund financial summary is as of August 31st, and then I'm going to show as an informational item, our annual transportation report, selected lines from that report. Overall, our annual average cost per pupil transported went up about 0.42% from FY21 to $786 roughly per student. So tonight we did approved our special education supplement, or our, excuse me, our special education, yeah,
Spending authority.
right, spending authority, thank you. And I'm going to give you some information on our annual transportation report. Next month, in November, we have some applications for limited English proficiency allowable costs. That's that second area where if we overspend in that limited English proficiency area, we can ask for additional authority, and that application has been delayed by the Department of Ed, so we have not been able to complete that yet for FY22. So once we complete that, it'll be presented in November. And then we also will have our school budget review applications. These will be for FY23, potentially for increase in enrollment or increase in open enrollment out, and limited English proficiency instruction beyond 5 years. And I'll give some more explanation about that in November. And we are well on our way to our FY22 audit. We do have that going on right now, and they will be on site in our office on Monday, October 17th. So I'll pass through the next 2 pages, our deposit balances as of August and July. Not a lot of activity as far as their fund financials. July and August are relatively slow months as far as revenue. You know, we start getting our state aid here in September, our property tax revenue in October. So I'll be presenting that more in detail next month. So the last page is selected lines from our annual transportation report. So I'm just showing you the miles that have been put on all of our buses and all of our vehicles last year compared to the year before. Some student count information is there, and you also know, or if you don't know, we do transport non-public students. We do get a reimbursement from the state of Iowa at the end of the year for that, for transporting those students. And then the last section are our transportation costs. You can see there that our fuel costs have gone up significantly over the last 3 years, although I'm just showing you the last 2 years here, just so I didn't want to crunch all the numbers together. But and then, you know, there's selected lines there of transportation costs, and then we get down to the bottom of the $786.41. And where that comes into play is, as you know, in the legislature, there are school districts that receive transportation equity payments. We have not qualified in Muscatine for that the last 2 years because we were above that threshold. So I don't know where we're at as far as that goes for FY22 yet. So any questions? Short and sweet, so thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we move to item B, and we have the first reading on policies. 702.8, bond disclosure, a new item. 702.8, E1, bond disclosure exhibit 1, a new item. 702.8, E2, bond disclosure exhibit 2, a new item. 106, assistance animals, a new item. 504.5, public performance by students. 504.6, contest for students, and is recommended to delete this item, this policy, I'm sorry. 506.6, requirements for graduation. Any question about any of the policies? And remember, this is the first reading. We still have to go through this 2 more times, but any question, please, Daphne will be, I'm sure, willing to answer any question, right? So, any question before we move on? Okay. Item C, announce.
Just one question, because it has had the requirements for graduation. I see we're knocking that down 1 credit too, and
That was part of that decision to as we did the portrait of a Muskie grad. And remember that just puts us in better balance with every
Rest of the
state,
state.
every district in the state, right? And one of the things we were finding is, at one point, again, we were on a block schedule, right? And under a block schedule, you can accumulate more credits. So the threshold was raised in order to accommodate that block schedule. We went away from the block schedule and didn't readjust, right? So this brings it back to that adjustment.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
I guess I have a question also on the assistance animals. So it has like miniature horses. We could have a miniature horse walk around the high school?
All of that came out of, it's been case law.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it very common? No, but it
Could happen.
because it is clarified in cases, that it is in policies, and it was in policies in other states I've been as well.
So these horses would have to be certified, obviously, as
And
assistance animals.
they're kind of the size of
Yeah, I've
dogs,
seen.
like
I've
larger
seen them
dogs,
before.
right.
Yeah. Just
I
kind of
think
curious.
there's other areas outside of schools where they can be allowed on airplanes. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
It has expanded significantly over the last 5 years in terms of what's allowed, but it has all been tested out in court. And so as we look at our policies, we try
Okay.
to align to what's legal.
Any other questions?
I just want to say a little bit more with that. There's always been some stigma when it comes to having a service animal. I myself have had a service animal, but unfortunately, my dog, who is now 14 and half blind and deaf himself, can no longer be my service animal because of my hearing impairment problems. And I can tell you throughout the years, there's always been people that may not understand what those animals do in support, not only out in public, but in somebody's home and such, and why you have to have them with you all the time for them to bond with you and everything else that goes along with that. And so I think we've come a long way with how a lot of that does, but we still have a long way to go so that people do understand and not mock or make fun of or interrupt a service animal as they're working.
Thank you, Karen, for that. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Item C, announcements, meetings, and events. October 11, the Riverbend Mobile Food Pantry at the Administration Center, District Office, 4:30 to 6. October 17th to 20, school conferences. October 20th, we have 2-hour early dismissal. October 21st, no school. October 24th, work session, board meeting at the Administration Center at 6 p.m. October 25, SIAC meeting at the Administration Center at 4:30. November 14th, school board community conversation will be at 6 p.m. in this building here at the lower level of City Hall. And November 14th, we'll have our regular board meeting / annual organizational meeting at 7 p.m. here in the City Hall. Any other announcement that anyone has to add? Okay. Can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Well, good night, everybody.